Alright, so today is a tutorial on how to do make some scale mail. Basically, I'm going to cover the information um, that follows making the scales themselves and the rivets. Because basically making the scales is just cutting out little pieces of metal and drilling some holes. That's pretty simple and self-explanatory, and I don't think that really needs a tutorial. To be honest, I don't think any of this needs a tutorial because I figured it out myself from the ground up. But not everyone seems to be able to do that for some reason, so I'm going to explain it to people. Basically, the first thing I did was I made a template for the leather, and I laid out all the scales that I wanted to put out on the leather on it without riveting them down to make sure that the size was right, that all the scales would fit on the shape, and just make sure that everything was going to work correctly. And after that, after I figured all that out, I cut the leather out with just a knife and started riveting the scales on. And I'll actually show you a little bit up closer. Yeah. That top layer right there is not riveted on yet, and I'm going to show you how to lay that out and mark the hole locations on the leather so that holes can be drilled that will allow the scales to be properly placed. Basically, I lay this out one layer at a time just so I make sure that everything is correct. And I've laid out this row so that all the bottoms are roughly in line, and so that the scales are roughly half the distance down. So there's a good overlap going on there. And then what I do, I've actually done it with this one already, and I'll show you that up close real quick, is I take a nail. I don't know if you're going to be able to see these. There they are. Yeah, you can see the marks. I take a nail and I hold the scale down and I poke through the holes there and there. And that just marks the leather where I'm going to drill the holes out. Because I could use a leather punch on the sides, but the holes in the middle I can't get a leather punch to, so I've got to drill them out on the drill press. So, I will just show you me doing that. That one's already done. And push the nail in. Make sure it's as close to centered as I can. And put that up there. And mark. And mark. And mark. That's the first 5. Now I'm going to mark the back of each of these scales because these scales are not CNC precision cut, so all these holes are in slightly different locations. They're all relatively close to the same spot, but they're not completely interchangeable, so I need to make sure that I keep each scale in the correct location for where I wanted it to be. So I'm going to mark the back of each scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is going to be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Although you can't actually see those in the frame, can you? Well, yeah, a little bit. But when I've got those scales marked, basically the first scale from left to right is 1 to 10. And that's just easy for me to keep track of. And that way, if I get them shuffled up or something, I don't get them all confused and have to piece them back together based on which scale actually looks like it fits in the right place. But I did the first 5, and I'll do the next 5 off camera, and then I'll show you drilling and riveting. Alright, now to drilling the holes. I've got my drill press set up with a drill that is of the appropriate size for a hole that will allow the rivets to go through. The rivets I'm using are just nails that have had the heads cut off and have about a 1/4 inch of the shaft left on the head. So I just measured that with a pair of calipers and figured it out from there. Basically what I did is I put the leather and the scales on a board just because it's easier to hold it that way. Tuned it into the appropriate speed. Well, actually, for leather, there almost is no appropriate speed. You can use pretty much any speed you want because it's just soft material. But because I was drilling steel before this, it's set to the appropriate speed for steel. And basically what I'm going to do is just try to get as close. I'm going to try to center the drill as best I can on these marks that I've made, and that will determine the angle of the scales. I have messed up a couple of the locations of these holes, and as such some of these scales are offset from where they should be, but I've just got to do the best I can. Obviously, the more scales you put on, the heavier it becomes and the more difficult it becomes to maneuver around, but you just gotta make the best of it. So I'm gonna drill the rest of these holes and then I will show you how to rivet it on. Alright, next step is actually riveting it all together. An anvil is a good thing to have. You don't necessarily need an anvil. You could use a piece of railroad track if you've got a piece hanging around. They're relatively easy to come by and fairly cheap usually. This anvil was pretty cheap just because it's so beat up and old. But even just a bench vise, like that over there, has a small anvil surface on it. So pretty much any large block of metal will serve the purpose. And you're going to need a hammer. You don't need a sledgehammer. You can use like a regular nail driving hammer if you need. Just a hammer. And it's going to be helpful to have a small piece of tube. This is just the end of an AK barrel, which is good because it's hardened. You're going to want one of your nails, and you're obviously going to need your scales and your rivets, which are the same nails, just cut way down. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is take your nail and push it through the hole just to widen it up a little bit, because the drill will get it pretty much good to size, but it'll still be kind of tricky to push the rivet through. So you want to work the nail through a couple of times. It's got these little ridges on it, at least this particular kind of nail does, which kind of helps dislodge some loose material. And then you're going to take your rivet and you're going to push it through the back side. And make sure not to poke your hand. And do the same thing with the second hole, because there are 2 rivets per scale. At least with the technique I'm using. You could do 3 or more, or however many you felt like, depending on the pattern you were using. Now flip it over. Now you remember I labeled my scales 1 through 10 as per left to right. So I'm going to pick up the scale labeled number 1. And if I positioned my marks properly and then drilled my holes in the correct location, this should sit pretty much where I want it to. Now this is where your little tube comes in. Because of the ridges on the nail, it won't want to go directly through the hole. The hole is slightly undersized. So you're going to place the tubes, pretty much any tube will do, but this is just better. You're going to place your tube over where the nail is so that when the rivet pops through, it'll just go into the hole, and tap it a little bit, and do that with both of them. And it'll change tone a little bit when it bottoms out. Pretty much good. Get it good and tight on there. Then hold on to your scale. Make sure you don't smash your thumb, obviously, because you're going to be striking relatively hard. And just flatten those rivets out. Now this can also come in handy again if your scale starts to warp up a little bit whenever you're pounding the rivets, because you can smash it back down a little bit. Obviously it's a good idea to wear hearing protection when you're doing this, just because hammering pieces of metal is usually a pretty loud process, but I'm reckless and have no regard for my health or well-being, so I'm not wearing hearing protection. I'll do this. I think I'll do another 2 rivets on camera for you, just to show you how I do it. And then I'll cut to something else. Number 2. And once you really get going, it can be a pretty quick process. Scale 3. There we go. There we go. So that's the first 3 done, and that didn't take too terribly long. So that's basically how I do it. That's how you can do it, but you'll probably want to adapt your technique a little bit depending on your specific circumstances. So I've been showing you the tutorial about how to make the scale armor. And so I'll show you the actual finished product, or the almost finished product. I might make some little alterations here or there, but it's pretty much done. And I wore it to the Ren Fair just a little while ago, so, well, a couple of days ago, so it works pretty well, although it is very loud. All I had to do was make this front panel and the back panel, and then make this shoulder harness mantle type thing, and just sew it on with some waxed thread. That's pretty much it, and then I punched a few holes, braided some suede cord, and passed it through there to fasten up the sides, and it works pretty well. I designed the mantle basically around this general shape and the dimensions on it, but I just cut it out of the same leather that I had. This I did not make. I bought that, well, no, my folks bought that for me years and years ago back in England. But here's this overall, and it weighs about 30 pounds right now, and it's quite loud to wear, just because it clacks around a good bit, especially the leg pieces when you're walking around. But it's pretty comfortable to wear. I did not have any real trouble wearing it around for 4 or 6 hours, just trudging around at the Ren Fair on Saturday. So, and we also smacked at it with some Starfire weapons and got some video of that. So if I can get the video footage from my friend, I will paste that at the end of this video after this clip. And if I can't get it, then I might show you that later. So anyway, that's what it looks like. Pretty much
Good
done.
shank off.
We're rolling.
That was pretty good.
Seeing dents on the steel.
Alright,
That's it.
that's good for that.
Rolling.
Wasn't too bad. Ooh, that's got a good sting to it.
That's good.
That was good.
Also with this, it's focused more. And that focuses
That
more.
that's actually better. It spread it out across
Yeah.
a wider area for sure.
I weighed it with me, and then it's 10
That's
pounds.
10.
It's just really well balanced because the whole thing's. Anyway,
Okay.
You rolling?
This is what we call science, people.
Only difference
This is
is
not
that
what we
screwing
call
around is
science.
recording it.
Ooh, that was good.
You good?
Yeah.
I just
yeah.
had to slide with it.
Yeah. That
So
sure did it.
That's
That's
but
good.
that's pretty solid. I mean, that's
Yeah.
you wouldn't be able to get much harder of a hit in like a sparring match or even just like an actual fight without you being wide open.